Did you ever watch cartoons as a child? I know we used to watch the Looney Tunes cartoons. I'm dating myself a little bit. But there were often moments in those cartoons where somebody would be playing tennis or something would be happening, and you would see everybody in the background of the shot, like all the other cartoons in the back, following the ball, going like this, tick, tock, like following the ball or whatever it was that was happening back and forth, right, from one side of the screen to the other. And oftentimes, that is what I think of when we engage in communication the way most of us do. But there's one tweak, one simple shift that, if we implement it correctly, can completely alter the way we communicate, how effectively our communication is received, how well we land our communication with whoever it is that we're talking with, and how much we turn even the toughest of situations into opportunities for connection, for understanding, and for growth. So today on Sincerely Speaking, we're going to focus on understanding what that one tweak is and the one rule we get to follow in order to completely transform the way we communicate and the results we get. Are you ready? Let's dive in. I am going to make a comparison at the beginning of our conversation today that might seem a little unfair at first, but follow along with me and see if you cannot see the correlation by the time we're done in our conversation today. Doctors, when they first become doctors, they have a Hippocratic oath, right? They have an oath that they have to follow. And at the end of all of that, the summary of everything that they need to keep in mind and the way they should operate with their patients and in their lives in general is by this mantra of first do no harm, right? So whatever it is that doctors do, whatever it is that they pursue, whether they're treating a new patient or going into surgery or even delivering the news that something is not necessarily good, they have in mind this rule of first do no harm. And very often, I mean, I'm not a doctor myself, but from what I understand, very often they're very delicate decisions boil down to what is the least harm that we can cause in this particular situation. How can we make this final decision in a way that causes the least amount of harm possible? And I can only imagine how horrible that situation must be. And I'm not trying to lessen the severity, right, of what doctors go through and what they have to deal with. I'm not by any means trying to lessen that or diminish that in any way. But I want us to keep in mind as we engage in our conversation today that there is a similar mantra that we're going to get to follow as we engage in our communications with other people, especially if what we are doing is something that relates to the area of influence. So whether we are talking now about a salesperson selling something or a marketer selling something, whether we're talking about a business, a coach, a consultant, anybody that gets to sell products or services that can impact in one way or another the life of the people that they're selling it to. Whether we're talking about parents dealing with their children or spouses dealing with each other or whatever kind of interaction or relationship you're in, what we are going to talk about becomes particularly important when we are in a relationship where one person can influence the other in any way, shape, or form. I always tell my clients and everybody that I talk to that some of the things I teach are so powerful when implemented correctly that I often wonder to what extent I need to put caveats in what I teach and in what we do. Because once you master communication, you have this incredibly powerful tool in your hands that is going to either open doors for you to do a lot of good or expose other people to you harming them through manipulation. So I want to preface this conversation that we're going to have today with the understanding that what we are going to learn today is extremely powerful. And I don't say it lightly when I say that this one tweak, if you implement it correctly, will completely transform the way you communicate from this moment forward. And it will put you in a position where you are powerful enough, for lack of a better word, or where you have enough power in your communication to affect influence upon others. And so it is important to understand that we are going to be going into a technique and a strategy. No, I don't even know that that's the right word for it, but a rule, really, a tool that if you use it properly, it's going to completely change the way you interact with people. In fact, the reason I love teaching this is because of the positive effect it can have. If you're anything like me, you have spent most of your life avoiding confrontation. You have grown up thinking that if you oppose what somebody else says, or if you are in any way argumentative or disagreeable, like you're not agreeing completely with what the other person is saying, then you are creating this conflict that becomes a fight that will eventually become hurt feelings and offenses, right? And you avoid it because you don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. On the contrary, you want everybody to be happy, everybody to be in peace, everybody to be okay. But again, if you're anything like me and most of the people I work with, what ends up happening is the complete opposite. Then because you are being so conscious of, or so worried about, it's the right expression, so worried about not harming or hurting others, not being offensive in the way you express yourself, and not disagreeing with other people to the point where they will see you as unyielding or inflexible, then you end up shutting your mouth, not really expressing fully what you believe or what you think, and maybe in the process even misguiding inadvertently the other person, because then they think that you agree with them, or they think that what they said was fine by you, or they think that you're okay with whatever the choice at the end was, when in reality you don't agree, when in reality you are not happy with the end decision. So what we are going to talk about today is the one thing that I know for certain can make it so that even the most difficult of quote unquote confrontations can become a win-win-win for everybody involved. And it doesn't have to feel anymore like you're walking on eggshells trying to not offend anybody, or like you are trying to take advantage of the situation, or feeling like the other person is going to perceive you as trying to take advantage of the situation. Because what is going to happen when you understand this one rule and this one tweak, and once you start implementing it, is that everybody in the conversation is going to feel fully 100% completely heard and fully 100% completely understood, which means that they will feel seen. And if you know anything about psychology, anything about the way humans behave, generally speaking, and again, there's a lot of generalizing in everything that we're going to say and do, right? But generally speaking, the biggest or highest level need or desire for all human beings is that need to be seen, felt, heard, and understood. Seen, heard, and understood. So applying this one tweak, applying this one rule is going to make it so that everybody in the conversation actually feels seen, heard, and understood. And so at the end of it, you might still not agree. You might still not be able to say, you know what, you're right, or I was wrong, or whatever, although you might get to that space. But even if you don't, even if the end conclusion is still that you disagree, that you don't think the same way as this other person, you will all still feel like you were at the very least seen, heard, and understood. And that you, in turn, are going to be clear that your thoughts were heard and understood and taken to heart. And the person might still not agree with you, but they heard you. Right? And so we are going to walk through this one rule, and then I'm going to break down a few specifics surrounding how to apply it in everyday situations. You ready? Are you ready? So here we go. The rule, the one tweak that we get to make that is going to transform completely all of our communication is to listen with curiosity. To listen with curiosity. Remember at the beginning when I shared the cartoon situation where the cartoons are just bobbing their heads back and forth, following the ball or whatever that might be. And it happens in movies too and series. But remember that situation? That's the way most of us interact in communication. We throw the ball and we are waiting and anticipating for the ball to come back just so that we can hit that ball back to the other person. And we are looking to not be caught off guard to where we can't hit that ball, right? And we're almost keeping score most of the time. And at the end, we want this feeling of, oh, we won. And that's the way most of us engage in communication, which is why so often communication, when there's disagreement, can feel like conflict. It can feel like butting heads or fighting or just this tense situation, right? This confrontation that we avoid because it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel comfortable. It feels horrible at the end of it, especially for the one who quote unquote doesn't win. And even the one that quote unquote wins at the end usually has all these regrets about the way the conversation worked and these worries about whether the relationship is now not effective anymore or ruined in one way or another. So when we listen with curiosity, we are shifting the paradigm of how we approach this conversation. We are no longer in it to win it. We're no longer in this conversation keeping score or waiting for the ball to be sent back our way so we can hit it or bat it out of the park. What we are doing in this conversation now is putting on pretty much our detective hat, and we're trying to figure out how we can best mine and pull out the gold that is in the conversation. We are looking for ways to enrich the lives of everybody involved by fully listening, being completely present, and really curious about what the other person is saying, but also what is beyond what they are saying. Now, I want to clarify something here before we move any further. We are looking to clarify what they're really saying, but we are not attempting to be mind readers. And this is a very important distinction to make, because quite often we look at the person, we believe we know the person, especially if it's someone really close to us, like a spouse or a kid or one of our children. And we hear the words, but in the back of our mind, we're trying to be mind readers and we're trying to dig into that underlying message that we believe they're hiding from us. And so we come up with all these weird stories about what they mean. So one of the things we're going to be talking about in a minute is that distinction between fact and story. And it's the ability to be so curious, like a little kid, right? So think about, I have a bunch of nieces and nephews, but I have two that are still under the age of 8. And so when they are engaged in a conversation, what is it that mostly comes out of their mouth? It's questions, right? A little kid will ask you 20 million questions in the span of 20 minutes. And the more you tell them, the more information you give them, the more curious they get about, oh, wait, but why? What does that mean? Why is it that way? Now, I want to also caution you, right, that you don't want to get to the point of annoying the other person, but get to that space of genuine curiosity like a child, of really making sure that your ultimate goal, your ultimate purpose in the conversation is to understand what the other person is saying and why it's important to them. It's to get yourself as close to feeling what they feel and seeing what they see, so that you can understand where they're coming from and why they might believe what they believe, even if it's different from what you believe, right? So it's this idea of curiosity that makes this different, because you will hear tons of people out there talking about how important listening is. And there's the cliche of God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. And all of that is valid. But where I think they stop short is in helping us understand, how do we then listen in a way that creates the results that we're after, right? In a way that creates the space for everybody to, like I said, be seen, heard, and understood, and for everybody to walk out of the experience feeling like they gained something from it. Very often, the way that they present, that most people out there present listening, feels almost like you're going to sit there passively, just looking at the person, nodding, and every once in a while repeating what they say, And it's going to make you feel almost like you're about to explode sometimes, because you have things to say as well. You have things to contribute to the conversation, but they make it seem like almost like it's wrong to bring your part of the conversation into it. And we're going to talk a little bit in a few minutes about how we do that and when do we get to do that. But we are going to focus a lot on how do we become so curious, like a little kid, that we allow ourselves the space to ask the right questions with the right heart and with the right presence, so that the other person feels like we are genuinely doing everything in our power to understand them. Because guess what? That is exactly what we're doing. We are putting all of our effort, all of our energy, all of our focus into completely understanding where they're coming from and why they feel or think the way they do. The funny thing about this is that very, very often, the more curious you become about the way the other person thinks and feels, the more you're going to find that you have a lot of things in common, even in the disagreement. And very often, as you ask the right questions with the right heart and in the spirit of curiosity, the other person will hear themselves say things that don't really make that much sense to them. And they will start realizing that maybe they were a little bit just stuck in their ways, that they were a little bit closed off to the possibility that they might also need to listen to the other side a little bit more. And that opens up the channels of communication so that the interaction goes both ways at the end, right? So let's dive into how curiosity really works at 3 levels. We're going to talk about yourself. We're going to talk about the other person or people involved in the conversation, and then we're going to talk about the context. Now, if you have been following me for a while, a lot of what we're going to say in this conversation today is a little bit of a review of some of the other things we've talked about, but I think it's important to frame them in the space of this one rule, right? So our rule is that whatever conversation we're in, whatever interaction we're engaging in, whatever communication we're participating in, we are going to listen with curiosity. That's our rule. No matter what interaction it is, no matter where we're at, no matter who we're talking with, no matter what the situation might be, our rule is whenever we're interacting with another human being or other human beings, we are going to listen with curiosity, regardless of the age, regardless of the status, regardless of whether there are employees or our children or our students or our spouse. We are going to engage in conversations and in communication from a standpoint of listening with curiosity. That's the rule. And that's the tweak. Once you do that, you're going to start to see your communication shift, and it's going to completely transform everything that you do. So when it comes to yourself, you need to start, or the suggestion is, right, that you start the conversation even before the interaction begins by getting curious about yourself and the way that you are coming into the conversation. So you're going to start by listening to yourself talk with curiosity. You're going to listen to what you're telling yourself ahead of the conversation, what you're telling yourself about why you want to have this conversation, what you're telling yourself about the topic of the conversation. And the idea here is to identify 3 key things, right? The first one is, are you bringing any agenda into the conversation that is anything other than listening with curiosity? If you're bringing any other agenda into it, like I'm going to convince my husband that the best vacation spot is Disney and not Universal. I don't know, I'm a Disney freak, so I will always inject that in there as much as I can. So if that is what you ultimately want, you're not in a space to have the conversation. If you're engaging in the conversation because you're going to convince your kid that they need to start college now instead of taking a gap year, you have an agenda that is other than listening with curiosity. Don't have the conversation at this point. Whatever, if you can hear yourself planning ahead to what you want at the end of the conversation, you have an agenda. And if you bring an agenda into the conversation other than listening with curiosity, other than mining the gold in what this person is saying, other than listening so that you fully understand, then you're not in the right mental space to have the conversation. Because anything that they say or do that goes against what your agenda is going to trigger you into something that is not going to be conducive to everybody being seen, heard, and understood. So the first thing you're listening for with curiosity is yourself and whether you have an agenda that you're bringing into the conversation. The second thing that you're going to listen to yourself for, right, is listen to what you are telling yourself about the way you feel, your emotions surrounding this conversation. If you find yourself feeling nervous, feeling angry, feeling frustrated, feeling any emotion that is not empowering or that might trigger you, then maybe delay or postpone or pause the conversation. Because what's going to happen is if you are already predisposing yourself to those disempowering emotions, you are not going to be open to listening the way you get to listen in order to everybody being seen, heard, and understood. So the way to work with this, and trust me, I know this isn't always easy, but it's necessary, is to understand that all emotions are neutral. What changes the emotion is the definition or the meaning we give it, how we decide to perceive it. Emotions are neutral. They're not good. They're not bad. The example I always give is this. Have you ever seen a football game or sporting event? Soccer tends to have this happen quite a bit just because they have really passionate, loyal fans, right? So you see, for example, a soccer game, and the winning team is so elated, so excited, so happy that they go out and destroy all the property that's around the stadium as soon as the game is over. Now, happiness is usually considered a positive emotion. But in that case, where they ended up destroying property and maybe even getting into fights with the opposite team and all these other things because of how happy they were, was it an empowering emotion at that moment? Did it lead to something positive? The answer is no, right? But you can also have, for example, I guarantee that Dr. Martin Luther King was frustrated and angry at the way things were in the world, in the United States particularly, when he was around. And that anger led to him taking the stage and speaking in favor of the Black community. So that anger, which is usually considered a negative emotion, in this particular example became something empowering that led to positive outcomes, that led to positive change starting to happen. Right? It didn't fix everything, but it led to positive, empowering things. So you get my drift. So no emotion is innately good or bad. What happens is that we give it a specific meaning, and that meaning is what determines how we use that emotion or how that emotion affects us, right? So if you feel yourself with any emotion that feels like it's going to trigger something that is not conducive to positive results, so something that is disempowering, then remind yourself that all emotions are neutral and ask yourself, how else can I define this feeling? What else could this emotion mean? What else could this be? I'll give you a very clear, direct example. This particular morning, today, as I am recording this morning, I woke up with all these fluttery emotions in my body. They woke me up. And normally, before I started working on myself and understanding self-talk and all these things, I would have said, oh, I'm anxious. I'm nervous about something. And I would spend my entire day looking for the reason why I was nervous or anxious or upset. And I would spend my entire day upset, nervous, and anxious. But this morning, today, as I opened my eyes and I felt that emotion, I stopped, I took a breath, and I said, Lord, thank you, because I'm excited and in anticipation of something great. Same emotion in my body, same symptoms, but I gave them a different diagnosis. I gave them a different meaning. And so I've walked through my day feeling excited and in anticipation of something great happening before the day's over. And it might not happen. Nothing might happen. I might go to bed tonight and think back and be like, it was just a normal average day. But if I had not shifted the meaning I gave those emotions, I would have spent the entire day waiting for something negative. See my drift? So whenever you feel any emotion around the conversation you're about to have, stop, ask yourself, what meaning are you attributing to those emotions, and neutralize them, right? Remind yourself all feelings are neutral. They don't mean anything in and of themselves. So what other meaning can I give to this emotion that is going to help me be in an empowered state when I start this conversation? And then finally, Be really aware and listen to yourself with curiosity for the stories you might be telling yourself, right? So you might be telling yourself a story about what the other person is thinking or feeling. You might be telling yourself a story about what something they said actually means when you haven't asked them. You might be telling yourself a story about how the conversation is going to pan out, and you might actually be envisioning the entire conversation in one way or another, right? Empowering or disempowering. Eliminate the stories. Just understand the facts, right? The facts are you're about to have a conversation, who the person is, what the end result is that you want out of this conversation in terms of what is the topic that you're going to be discussing, right? So are we discussing where we're going on vacation? Are we discussing whether we're going to move and where we're going to move? Are we discussing the next set of plans for our business moving forward? What are we discussing in terms of the topic, right? Those are facts. But telling yourself, oh, we're going to talk about this idea that I have for the business and he hates it and he's not going to agree with me. That's a story. You don't know that, right? So keep it to the facts, stick to the facts, the things that are objective, that you can actually go out and say, yeah, they actually said, let's discuss what we are going to do moving forward. That doesn't mean they like it, they hate it. It doesn't mean anything. It just means they want to discuss what we're going to do moving forward. Awesome. Right? So remove the story, stick to the facts. So that's the self. For the others, you're going to work on being really curious about first the words that they say. Second, the body language that they're using. And third, the stories they might be bringing into the conversation as well, right? And again, you're not trying to play mind reader. And we're going to go through each of these in a little bit more detail. I just realized that we're running out of time and I want to make sure that we get all the key information. But you're not trying to play mind reader. So the key here is, in order for you to listen with curiosity for all these things, you're going to learn how to ask questions and reflect the right way, right? So you're going to use two tools, questions and reflection. And reflection includes summary, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But for example, when they give words to you that you are starting to attach meaning to, for example, you're in this conversation with your business partner and they say, I don't feel like adding this other product to our line is the best course of action, right? Stop, and instead of assuming, oh, he doesn't want to do it, ask for clarification, right? So you can ask, can you tell me more about that? Why do you feel that way? And let them tell you what they're really saying. Then you're not assuming anything, right? The other thing that you can do is say, okay, so I'm hearing you say that you don't think this product is the right thing right now. Is that correct? See, you don't have to repeat for verbatim what they're saying, just what you're understanding, so that they can tell you whether your understanding is correct or not. And when you do this, you are inviting them to explain themselves better, which in turn makes them feel understood. Now, if all you do is ask, I don't get it. Can you tell me that again? Or, so you're saying that. See the tone, see how that's different? So make sure that you are, whether you're asking the question or whether you're reflecting, that your body language, your tone of voice is as neutral as you can get it, right? So you're not leaning forward, you're not crossing your arms, you're not doing this number, right, of like leaning against the chair so that it looks like you don't care. What you are doing is being neutral in your seat, or maybe even imitating their body language if you feel like that's appropriate, and then in a neutral voice. Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that you don't feel this product is right now. Is that correct? And they might say, I don't feel the product is right, period. Or, yeah, that's what I'm saying. And then you will get more clarification. Then you can operate from, instead of assumptions, you can operate from facts, right? So the second one is body language. There are three key things that I want you to keep in mind with body language. Body language is an entirely different conversation that could take several hours to cover, and still we would only be scratching the surface, right? But the first one is, look for any unusual tension in the body, right? So if you're talking to someone and they start getting really tense, like you see them tense up, you see them clenching their fists, or you see their mouth like just getting tense, or their eyes narrowing, they're starting to get pissed. They're probably starting to get really uncomfortable in the conversation, and they might not want to be there anymore, right? So if that happens, you have a decision to make. You have to understand whether your end goal is really to win or to gain understanding or to come to a space where you all feel, again, heard, seen, and understood and comfortable. At which point you can call out the tension in a comfortable, nice, relaxed way. You can say something like, look, I'm sensing that we're getting a little tense. Would you need a break? Or would it be okay if we just took a quick break? Or would you like to reschedule this conversation for a later time? Give them an out. Give them a space to get out. Because if they're that tense and you don't do something to try and calm it down, it's just not going to work. You're not going to get the end result if your end result is cooperation and understanding, right? The second thing to watch out for is arms and legs. If the arms and legs start crossing in any way, shape, or form, they're not listening. They're not in a position to hear you. They're not in a position to get to the space where they might actually be able to see your side of the conversation, which is not necessarily the ultimate goal, but you want the conversation to be open, right? So if they're starting to cross their arms, cross their legs, then what you want to do is ask them in a very normal, neutral tone, right? How are you feeling at this point? What is going on? Tell me. Based on what we've talked so far, based on what has been said so far, what are your thoughts right now? And give them an opportunity to vent and to speak and to talk. And when they start to talk, don't be quick to respond. Remember, this is not a ping pong situation or a tennis situation. This is a curious listening, right? So you're not defending yourself. You're not fighting back. You're not justifying anything that you said. You're not justifying anything that has been said by anybody in the conversation. You're simply inviting them to give you the cues that you need in order to understand what's going on. So when they start talking, invite more talking. Oh, tell me more about that. Can you expand on that a little bit? Okay, I'm hearing you say this. Is that right? Can you help me make sure I understand? The more you do that, the more they're going to vent and talk. And you are going to see, if you do this correctly, that eventually they're going to sigh or let it out. Like they're spent, like they're done. They already emptied everything out that was causing them to get all closed off. And at that point, be sensitive to not bombard them with more information that is going to make them close off again. Ask them if they're okay to continue the conversation. Ask them if it's okay for you to tell them what you are seeing. And be gentle in that, right? But make sure that you are paying close attention to those closed off moments. And the final thing is those moments when they lean in. If they lean in and their eyes are soft, right? So they lean in, but their eyes are comfortable and looking at you, and maybe there's a little smile on the face or whatever. Something you said just resonated with them in a positive way. Something you said made them feel like you understand them and like you are on the same page. But if they're leaning forward, like they're ready to pounce, if they're leaning forward with their eyes intense and closed off, if their mouth is tense, so there's a combination of leaning in and tensing, then be careful because they are angry. Most likely, right? So be paying attention to those three things. And then finally, their stories. What stories are they bringing in? So if they come in and they tell you, yesterday you walked in the door and you didn't greet me, and that made me feel like you don't value my presence. That's facts. You came in and you didn't greet them. And then they tell you how they felt. You can't tell them not to feel the way they feel, right? But if they start going on about, oh, you don't respect me, and you never say hi to me, and you walk right past me like I'm not there, and you never value my opinions, those are stories. And it's important for you to be listening curiously to those stories, right? And then you can ask something like, okay, I never say hello to you. You're not challenging, you're not excusing, you're just making sure they hear themselves going to that extreme, right? But you want to be listening to those stories and clarifying, right? So what I'm hearing you say is that you feel disrespected because you feel that I never listen to you. And let them explain. Again, you're looking for them to vent. And it might feel uncomfortable for you to hear all this venting and not defend yourself. But if you try to defend yourself, you're just amplifying their negative emotion at the moment. So just let them vent. When they finally are done, when they finally give you the mic back, don't defend yourself either. Ask more questions. Make sure you understand. Make sure you're clarifying, right? So again, self, others, and then in the context, listening with curiosity is simple. I'm going to just give you the 3 and then explain really quickly. No blindsiding anybody. That's the first thing about context. So parents were told at some point in time by some experts, and I have still heard some experts that say that this is something you should do. It's not. Pay attention. That the best time to have a conversation with your teenager is in the car when they can't get anywhere. If you do that to your teen, they're going to hate you and the car. They're not going to open up. They're just going to feel like you blindsided them, like you trapped them, and you did. Right? So make sure that you're not blindsiding anybody. If you need to have a deep conversation where the ultimate result is for you to open the door for listening, for everybody to feel seen, heard, and understood, the worst thing that you can do is just spawn this thing on them. So make sure that you are asking if it's a good time to have the conversation, that you're inviting them into the conversation. If they don't want to have the conversation, guess what? Forcing them to have it is the worst thing that you can do, because then you're going to encounter all those things we talked about in the previous others curiosity section. You're going to encounter the negative, the closed off body language, right? That is not conducive to the conversation. You're going to find that the words are in attack, and you're going to find that they have a million stories, and you're blindsiding them and just jumping into a conversation that they weren't expecting is just going to reinforce that everything they feel is accurate. So don't blindside anybody. The second, when it comes to context and listening with curiosity, is to remove all the static. So make sure that there's nothing in your sideline that is going to distract you or them. Make sure that there's no technology that is going to distract you or them. Make sure that you have a space that is conducive to actually having a conversation where nobody's going to interrupt that conversation, or there's very little chance of being interrupted, right? Things can always happen. Where there's a comfortable space, where if the conversation ends up getting emotional, they're free to be emotional, and so are you, right? But also a space where you all feel safe. So neutral ground whenever possible. And then finally, look for common ground. And I'm not talking now physically in the space. Like I said before, when you approach a conversation from a space of listening with curiosity, you're often going to find that you have more things in common than you have that separate you. So in the context of the conversation, start by trying to bring in any common ground that you already see. If you and your business partner, or you and your spouse, or you and your kid are in a conversation, it's because you already have something that you both care about, or you all care about. So start by bringing that to the surface and making that the center of why you're having the conversation in the first place, right? So it's important for us to have this conversation because we all care a lot about where we live next and what that means for the family. Or it's important for us to have this conversation about the products we're bringing in because we want what's best for the company, right? Start with the common ground. And as you engage in the conversation and in the curious listening, what you're mining for in the context of the conversation is additional common ground, is additional places and things in which you can agree with each other that will bring you closer together. All right, so this one has been a little bit longer than most, but it's something that I'm so passionate about that I know will transform the way you communicate with people. I promise to expand a little bit more on all these later on in the podcast, but if you have specific questions about any of the things I just said, go ahead and shoot me an email at marcy@marcyamaro.com with your questions. Again, that's marcy@marcyamaro.com, so that I can reply to the specific questions you might have regarding how to implement this curious listening. And I also want to invite you to head on over to marcyamaro.com, where you will have access to more resources and information about upcoming trainings and upcoming events in which you can get as much value as I have to offer. So until next time, I hope you have found this information useful and that you will share it with your friends. And I will see you next week on Sincerely Speaking. Bye-bye.